Nice small intimate group this morning, so welcome and thank you for coming to Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London. Now this place is a World Heritage Site. To perform as a World Heritage Site, it needs to have a number of things. One, it needs to be very old. Two, it needs to have people living in it. And three, it needs to have very old people living here. And I'm one of those very old people. My name's Gary, and I'm one of the 37 yeoman warders, commonly known as beefeaters, that have the right, the privilege and the honour to live and work in this amazing place. He later became known as William the Conqueror. No, the Duke of Normandy. Have you done no research today before you came here? No, me neither. I've just turned up. Right, he wasn't known as William the Conqueror for very long. Ironically though, the only one that has anything to do with the Royal Mint today, you lazy like the back, couldn't even be bothered to look up, could you? Yeah. I'm not doing it all, you know. It's called the Bell Tower, thank you. Right. Hi. Where are you from?
I don't know.
Where?
I don't know.
You don't, oh, you don't know? No, me neither. Right, here we are. Stood in front of the world famous, or should I say infamous, Traitors' Gate. It started life as the Traders' Gate, because of all the stores and provisions needed to run this amazing royal palace and fortress were brought through here by barge or by boat, used and or stored for whatever their purpose was. Gets its name the Traitors' Gate because of the other form of cargo that was brought in this way. And that is the fact, people! 4 Queens of England, 3 bishops and a handful of dukes and earls were brought through this way, taken into the tower, tried and or condemned. Very rapidly. Right, behind you there is the Tower of Blood or the Bloody Tower. But to give it its proper name, it's called the Garden Tower. Now I can see why that was changed for marketing purposes, but actually it's called the Garden Tower because it overlooks the Lieutenant's garden. Right, here we are then, in the inner ward of the Tower of London. This is where it all happened. Down there is the entrance to the Bloody Tower. We've just been speaking about that. Coming further round, blue front doors, again, more accommodation for my yeoman ward colleagues. Coming into the corner there, that is the Queen, the doctor lives. If he can't fix you, you pop next door, where the chaplain lives. If he can't fix you, you pop into his office, the Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula, which is Latin for St. Peter in chains. There's been a chapel on that site since the year 1110. We have 3 Queens of England buried in there. Coming further round, the Waterloo block. Now, it started on that building sometime later. In the late 1840s, that building took on 2 and a great harm shall befall the monarchy. That's a myth and that's a legend. We don't believe in myths and legends anymore. Sometime before 1685, King Charles II passed a royal decree to keep 6 ravens here. But that's a myth and that's a legend. As I say, we don't believe in myths and legends anymore. We are people of science. We are people of understanding. Some of us have been to school. School, what a week that was. We don't believe in that kind of thing, but just in case, we keep 8 ravens here. I'm joking. If anybody's been offended, live with it. Canadians, where's our Canadians? Got any Canadians left here? They're gone, good luck. If you've enjoyed the show, ladies and gentlemen, my name's Gary. If you haven't, it's Bill.
Let's do this properly, shall we? Good evening. Good evening. Ooh, you're scared, aren't you? My name is John. I'm obviously your guide. Welcome to the tour. Welcome to the East End of London. Do any of you know this part of London at all? There's a few. I'm not surprised. A few of you know it. I mean, even if you don't live here or work here, a lot of people have heard of the East End for about the last 30 years for positive reasons, I suppose. A lot of people think of this area now as being trendy. It's a place centuries up to that point has not been that great. Let's just say that. Many people associate the East End with all sorts of unpleasant nastiness because it's often been a place that's had a lot of trouble. It's had a lot of friction in its time. More downs and ups. Let's just say that. Anyone reading books by London has ever thrown out, let alone the East End. The Whitechapel murders of 1888, as they're officially known. Some people prefer to call them The Whitechapel murders. In that voice, for effect. I mean, they are arguably the most infamous series of murders in true crime committed by, well, arguably the most infamous murderer in true crime, which, of course, for anybody who knows a little bit about this story, is quite odd, because officially we don't actually know who that individual was, despite many claims. That mystery is why things like this are happening. The jury has always been out on those. No one's ever been able to agree ever if they are connected with this case. I'm going to stick to the famous five, okay? Because what happened to those poor ladies and the events that surround it all are going to tell our story perfectly well. So that will begin with Mary Ann Nichols, or Polly as her friends told her. I'm going to tell you a bit about her background and what died in abject poverty. Some of them working the streets to survive. They died horribly, of course, and famously. But we know a lot about these women's life stories, all right? There's been books written about them to forget, and they weren't really going to be able to crawl out of the pit that they got known as Durwood Street, okay? Now, they find Mary Ann lying on the ground in front of some gates, right? And they're used to seeing people probably lying on the ground, knocked out or drunk, but it is a woman, right? So they are concerned. They can't really tell in the darkness if she's dead or alive, so off they rush to work. They don't want to be late. Promising to talk to the first policeman they came across. They weren't completely heartless, obviously. Now, within minutes of them leaving the spot, Police Constable John Neal arrives at the scene, the regular beat officer, and finds Mary Ann, like the men did, lying on the ground. He's got the bullseye lantern, all right? And in the light of that lantern, he's able to see very clearly something those two men missed in the dark, believe it or not. She's dead because her throat has been cut violently, okay? And it wasn't until they took her body to the mortuary when they realised there was something a little bit extra to this. They found two cuts in the throat. One had gone 3/4 of the way round the neck, as far down as her spine. And they also found in the lower abdomen a number of cuts and stabs. There was about 6 or 7 of them, but one of them, shockingly, in a jagged manner, as it was described, had literally opened her up from between her legs right up to her rib cage. And they said that the intestines were beginning to bulge out of the gap. This, right? Only a foreigner would do something so ghastly because British people are too cultured, right? It's a foreigner. That sounds rather racist, that, doesn't it? We're dealing with a lot of traffic noise here, and, however, it has changed for the better, but some of it, at least to look at, hasn't changed much at all. Did you look at the buildings on the way up? Yeah? They might now be full of coffee shops. John was a bit of a heavy drinker near the end, but it was Annie Chapman's serious alcoholism that really caused the problems. In the last 2 years living in Dorset Street, one imagines she was eking out a living in any way she could. We're never quite sure whether prostitution was part of it, but you never know. Around the corner in Hanbury Street. Now, I don't know if you know this, a number of the victims were seen with men quite close to the times of their deaths, and that suggests possible sightings of the murderer himself, even though the sightings were pretty hopeless. Chapman, this is it. Running along here, it's getting near the end of the week, so it's getting a bit lively. This street is a main cut through and therefore has always been a little bit busy, which might explain why the murder of Annie Chapman did not take place on the street itself. Over the road, before they put that sexy looking building up in 1970, was a row of houses of a similar age and appearance to the ones that we were just walking past. And here's a little view of that side of the street. And above my finger is number 29 Hanbury Street, which was about halfway down on the left. 17 people lived in that slum dwelling. Start chasing you down the street, and then as time went by you'd get joined by others, and sometimes apparently by the time the police dealt with those crowds, it was a case of hundreds of people following one man down the street, all right, willing to tear him limb from limb. These crimes. However, the one thing that's really made this the media sensation that it is still to this day happened on the 27th of September when this letter arrived at the offices of the Central News Agency in the middle of London. Written in red ink for effect, it was addressed to the boss of the agency, hence the nickname today, the Dear Boss letter, and it claimed to be written by the murderer himself. Now, it still survives, it's very fragile now, but it's in London's National Archives, along with all the other surviving documents on the case. This is arguably one of the most notorious letters ever written. There's a good reason for it, you'll find in a moment. Now, the whole thing is just a diatribe. It's mocking the authorities. It makes pretty lurid threats as well. This is how it starts. Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I've laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. I mean, that's literally doing that, isn't it, to the authorities? There's horrible threats like, I am down on whores and I shan't quit ripping them. until I do get buckled. In other words, I'm going to keep doing this till you stop me. Good luck, you know. And there's a very famous threat in here. The next job I do, I shall clip the ladies' ears off and send them to the police officers just for a jolly, wouldn't you? And throughout, there's all these little ha-has and stuff like that. So it's very arrogant, cheeky and mocking. What came at the end of this letter, though, is what has sealed it as iconic in history. Whoever wrote it signed it famously. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Hope you don't mind me giving the trade name. That's what he says there. Have you noticed I seem to be deliberately avoiding calling him Jack the Ripper on the tour so far? I've done that on purpose because that is when this name first became seen. One of the dormitories there, when she first came to the East End. Now, there's nothing wrong with that story, actually. All right, that building was built to house people like Mary Kelly at that time. We just have no way of knowing whether it's true. To raise the alarm. That's unfulfilled. Of a Jewish immigrant place. It was a very Jewish neighbourhood. 1 hour and 10 minutes after the body of Catherine Eddowes was found over in Mitre Square, Police Constable Alfred Long, on his regular beat, discovered in that doorway over there, which is this photograph here incidentally, a piece of blood-stained cloth lying on the ground, which would turn out to be a piece of Catherine Eddowes' clothing cut from her body and removed from the crime scene. Right? Now, that, to this day, is known as the only genuine piece of physical evidence ever dropped in this case by the Ripper that we know is 100% dead certain, all right? And of course, don't forget, in those days, there was no forensic science, so the only thing it would be telling anybody is that he came back into the East End after murdering over there. That's very risky. White chalk on the black bricks. Now, he said neither the cloth or the message were there 25 minutes earlier, all right? So that makes us assume that that message is linked to that genuine clue. This is what the message said. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. Now, has anyone ever heard about this before? Knew these books? There's a few heads nodding, and I'm surprised. Now, it's very difficult to know exactly what that means. All right, is it saying that the Jews are getting blamed for everything? Stop, or let's blame the Jews for everything? This is what it used to look like. Boing. Now, you've got to imagine the guy that took this photograph would be standing just about by the wall, about 50 yards up there, towards the alleyway there, and he's aiming his camera directly at us. So, you folks here are standing with your back to this house. In fact, you folks over there are in the house, right? You're in Mr. Taylor's picture framing shop, you are. That little spot there, back with the back wall of the house here and some stable gates here, was the darkest corner of Mitre Square, all right? There was one gas lamp that served the square, which was right on the other side, and it wasn't working properly. Okay, so you can barely see your hand in front of your face here, and this is where the body of Catherine Eddowes was found by PC Edward Watkins of the City Police. 5.5 weeks after the shocks of the double event and its controversies, the awful glut in Miller's Court. Right? For many, the horrific murder of Mary Jane Kelly finishes off the Whitechapel murders. But of course, thinking of that as the last murder is that these murders at one point ended, and they left the entire world scratching its head, wondering who the hell was responsible for all this mayhem, and it is still scratching its head today. This is not a murder case that just came and went, and then everyone just thinks, that's it, all over. Was also a serial killer who did have medical knowledge, I believe. He even killed his own children. He'd kill anybody who got in the way of his criminal enterprises, He apparently admitted to killing 27 people when he was eventually caught.